Thank you. On the subject of finances, I've been...
Sorry, we don't want to talk about that here because you're the only one in the room who has any interest in this.
I've been making decisions based on motion forward with my finances.
What do you mean?
By looking forward and saying, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to do. Not based on logic of how much money do I have. What can I budget out for this?
Well, now remember what we were talking about earlier. We're encouraging you to make all of your decisions on another criteria that you haven't mentioned here yet, and that is, how does it feel?
Right.
How does it feel? I want to give you some rules of thumb here just for a little bit. You know how you'll get an impulse to do something? Well, if the impulse comes from your happy state, follow it, because that means it's an impulse that's come from your state of connection. But if your impulse comes from something like frustration or worry, then don't follow it, because now you're making a decision from a disconnected part of you, and it will not play out as well. So the problem with us presenting something like that to any of you is that not all of you are clearly in the place where you're absolutely sure how you're feeling about things. In other words, that's the value of another one of the values of this game of virtual reality, is that the more you play it, the more clear it will be to you how you are feeling. The more aware you will be of what this emotion really is, because you're deliberately practicing emotions that feel good, and those emotions that have been in question won't be in question anymore. You'll be able to discern whether they really are good feeling emotions or whether they don't feel so good. So give us a little more and we'll guide you here.
Well, what I've been doing is really saying, you know what, I want to do what feels really good to me. And so I've made some decisions, and it always seems like the money comes. It just comes.
Well, that's a good indication. In other words, if you are making plans in advance from a place of feeling good, and the money is coming, what that's saying to you is you're reading your vibration right, you're following the impulse that is coming, and you are holding yourself in the place of allowing, and so therefore it comes. Sometimes people will say, well, I don't have the money that I really need to do this, but I'm going to find a way to get it. I'll use my credit card or I'll borrow it, and I'll do that. But there's this nagging feeling of frustration or worry that is still pretty active within their vibration, and so they're really not in the place of allowing it, and so they get the money and they spend the money, but they're not in the place of allowing, and so it's sort of they just get deeper and deeper in debt. As long as the dollars are flowing to you in response to the desire that you are holding, then you're right on track.
Well, it's a little bit like what you're saying. It's like, this is what I need. The money comes, but then I end up having this a little bit of a nagging thing going on.
Well, what you begin to notice is you'll begin to read yourself a little more closely, and you'll reach the place where the momentary exhilaration of the expenditure will not be enough to outweigh the concern that lingers. In other words, you'll reach this place where you really can feel which vibration is the most dominant. It's sort of hard when we're talking about money to say to someone who is just on the brink of making some expenditure that they think will please them or has already done it. It's hard for them to really discern which vibration is most dominant, because sometimes they're making the decision from a place of frustration or from a place of boredom or from a place of not having enough, and so so they're spiking just a little bit over the exhilaration of what they've just done, but the dominant vibration is one of, oh man, I must be out of my mind. That's what buyer's remorse is. That buyer's remorse is the feeling that is really the dominant feeling within you that comes to surface after the glow is off and so what we encourage you to do is, before you take the action, play the game of imagining having done it. In other words, try to play it out in your mind. Play out, pretend that you've already done it, and live with it for a couple of days. And then pretend that you changed your mind and didn't do it and live with that for a couple of days. And what begins to happen is what feels best will surface in a way that you really know. You see, we want to bring you back around to something we talked about a little bit ago, and this is so important. When we said, which do you choose, falsehood or truth? And you said truth. And then we said, which do you choose, feeling good or feeling bad? And you said, feeling good. And then we said, which do you choose, feeling good or truth? And we so much want to emphasize that you're always wanting to choose feeling good. You're really, 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 really wanting to choose feeling good. And what we notice, in fact, we rarely see an exception to this, is that someone who brings themselves into financial stability, and as you have so much coming in, and you find clever ways to only have that much or less than that much going out, there is more satisfaction and well-being that comes from that financial stability than ever comes from buying things that you really feel uncomfortable about buying. And so you want to remember that it's in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And sometimes you're not in the place where the reality of it makes it possible for you to do some things. And if you get bummed out about not being able to do them, now that's not serving you either. But if you do them and get yourself in a place of worry, that's not serving you either. And what we're recommending is really a third option, which is standing still, not taking the action that's going to put you in that worrisome place, and then fantasizing the outcome, getting your joy from the anticipation of it coming. That's the fastest way to get the universe to yield to you. If you can hold off spending dollars that you don't have, so that you can experience the maintenance of some semblance of financial well-being, and at the same time fantasize what it is you're wanting, so that you're raising your vibration relative to that. That's the optimum vibration for the universe to yield fortune to you. Satisfaction where I am and eagerness for more. But if you get yourself in a financial scramble, it's possible to find satisfaction where you are, but it's harder. For those who are already in a financial scramble, where you are already worried about your financial situation, we recommend virtual realities that get off the subject, or games on the subject that are fun to play. And the most fun game that we see any of you playing relative to dollars is the game of bringing myself into balance. And it is achieved by getting a columnar pad, listing your monthly expenses, one in each column, putting the greatest monthly outlay in the first column. It's usually house, sometimes something else, car, boat, all of the things, until you're down to the smallest payment that you make. And then say to yourself, I'm going to make a promise to myself that I'm going to do my very best to meet my minimums on all of these. And in fact, on those that are at the far end, I'm going to do better than meet the minimum. I'm going to double them. And then what begins to happen in your vibration is you begin to say, I'm not only keeping my promise to myself and to my creditors, but I am doing better than that. I'm actually doubling some of them. And there is so much vibrational oomph that you get from that. I'm doubling it. And then what begins to happen is, because this is a game of shortening the columns, what begins to happen is some of them evaporate rather quickly, and so the thing is shrinking this way now. And then you begin to look forward to the time that you're sitting down to pay the bills, because the game of shrinking the columns becomes a really fun game. And as you start to catch a little bit of the spirit of that, more money starts to flow in. Money that you didn't count on all of a sudden comes, and you say, wow, wipe that out, wipe that out, wipe that out. In other words, the feeling of getting into financial stability until the game of becoming free of debt becomes the most exhilarating, most exciting game that you ever play. In other words, and then you begin saying to yourself and to others, oh, I'm so close to being debt-free, free, and all that implies to you. Now, we don't care if you're debt-free or not. There are a lot of people that are doing very well financially that are using other people's money. In other words, there is not anything wrong with credit. We don't mean that. But there is something very unsettling about getting yourself financially stressed, because it affects you in so many moments of your day. It's a hard thing not to think about something that affects you so many times in a day. It keeps activating that vibration. And so while you can't do anything about the activation of that vibration, you can activate some other vibrations. You can activate some, I'm playing this financial game. You can activate the, I'm doubling my resource, I'm paying off some of these things twice as fast as I really need to. In other words, you can by doubling your efforts on something that's $20 a month, you can increase the value of your vibration far more than the $1,000 debt in another column. In other words, it's illogical, but it happens because you begin saying to yourself, I'm doing what I said I would do. Oh, there's so much value in that. I'm even doing more than I said I would do. There's really even more value in that. And as those columns begin to shrink and your sense of well-being, all of a sudden, more money begins to flow than you have any sensible use for. Money becomes a non-issue. Before you know it, you don't need to play that game anymore because there's so much money flowing into your experience that the specifics of where you put it don't matter. In other words, money avalanches into your experience when you stop doing the thing that's been keeping it from doing that. And the thing that you've been doing that's been keeping you from doing that is feeling jealous of others' money or frustrated about not having enough money or worried about too much debt. It always felt bad every time you were doing that thing you do that was pinching off your flow.
Great. That's great.
Yes.
I want to talk about agelessness. All my life I've never had any, I've always thought, I don't know, I just always thought I'd be like young, you know? I didn't really, the thought of getting old to me was like people around me would talk about it and I just wouldn't hear it. And over the last 3 years or so, it's been kind of creeping in, and those kinds of things. But
it's a hard thing for you to not hear because it's all around you, and it does sort of creep in because there are so many who are talking about it. And as they're talking about it, you just have to activate something else within you and practice it until it's just the way you feel. Esther turned the television on the other night, and Norman Lear was being interviewed by Ted Koppel. And it is his 80th birthday. And the interview opened by Mr. Koppel saying, "You're an old man." And he was unflappable. He just looked back at him and smiled and said, I was just sitting here wondering why I was here visiting with one of my father's friends. And what he meant was, my eyes can see you in your aging condition, but my eyes don't see me. And then he said, it's all a state of mind. He has 2 little children, twins, who are now 7 years old. And he talked about the life that brings into the household. And then Mr. Koppel wanted to talk about age some more. Well, aren't you pretty much out of your mind to start a family when you are 73 years old? What are the odds of you getting to spend any time with your children? And he said, well, I really wasn't considering it from my standpoint as much as from the standpoint of it was something that my wife really wanted, and her happiness was very important to me. And he said, she convinced me when she said one day, children lose their fathers when they're 4 and when they're 5 and when they're 10 and when they're 20. In other words, it happens all the time and the children do just fine. We have many wonderful years together. Now, as Esther listened to this dialogue, she thought, this man has discovered what Abraham has been talking about being ageless. His body is ageless. His mind is ageless. What is attracting around him is ageless. In other words, he is thriving. He is a man who in appearances is far younger than his 80 years acknowledge. Now, even as you begin examining in that detail, you can sort of get into trouble as you look at him and say, well, he doesn't look 20, or he doesn't look 30, or he doesn't look 40. And we say, in your environment where you have used age as a club to beat yourself over the head for so long, in other words, it is amazing the narrow window that your society considers the right age. It is this brief little window. I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there. Oh, I wish I was older. Oh, I wish I was older. I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm there. I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there.